In Activity 12, Moon Phases, students observe and record the changing shape of the moon. They first review the record of their observations to look for a pattern and then identify the pattern of the moon's changing shape and infer that this pattern repeats every 4 weeks. You will need the following materials from the kit. Activity Sheet 12, Parent Letters, Moon Phases Cards, Chalk, Moon Journals, Construction Paper, Shelf Paper, and Masking Tape. You will also need to provide crayons or colored pencils, and a heavy-duty stapler. To prepare for Session 1, make a copy of the parent letter for each student. In order to follow the moon's phases in the traditional order, begin observations a few days after the new moon. Make a moon journal for each student. Fold 8 double-sided copies of the moon journal sheet in half. Then fold a sheet of construction paper around the outside and staple the book at the crease. Hang the shelf paper for a class record of moon observations where it can be seen by all students, and draw lines to divide the strip of paper into 30 sections. To begin Session 1, review with students that the moon can be seen both during the day and at night. Ask students, what shape is the moon? Students may think of the moon as round. Some may recall seeing the moon assume different shapes, such as crescents and half circles. Distribute 1 moon journal to each student. Explain that they are to take their journals home every day and draw a picture of the moon each evening. They should use a separate page for each day and label the page with the date and time of observation. Distribute boxes of crayons or colored pencils and have students decorate their moon journal covers. Remind students to make their observations from the same location each night and to bring their journals back to school each day. Distribute the parent letter and tell students to give this letter to a parent or guardian before they begin their observations. Each morning, discuss students' moon journal drawings. Help students come to a consensus about how the moon appeared the previous night. On overcast days, consult another source for the shape of the moon that day. In the first section of the shelf paper, draw the shape of the moon based on class consensus. Date the drawing and repeat this procedure daily for the next 2 weeks. As the chart begins to fill in, ask students, how does the moon's shape seem to change? Help them understand that the moon appears to be growing steadily larger and more round each night. To prepare for Session 2, students will need their moon journals. The daytime portion of the observations will be made during the school day. These observations should begin about 3 days after the moon is full. Plan observations for as early in the school day as possible, before the moon has set. To begin Session 2, explain to the students that they will now be observing the moon in the daytime while at school. Have students retrieve their moon journals and then take the students outside. On the next page in their journals, have students draw a picture of what the moon looks like today. After observations have been made, return to the classroom and create a consensus drawing for the class record on the shelf paper. The observations and discussions should be repeated daily over the next 2 weeks. To prepare for Session 3, make a copy of Activity Sheet 12 for each student. Students will need their moon journals, a yellow crayon or colored pencil, and a copy of Activity Sheet 12. You will need the set of Moon Phases cards. To begin Session 3, make sure students' moon journals are filled with 1 month's worth of drawings. Encourage students to examine their observations and ask, what has happened to the moon's shape over the last 2 weeks? Students should note that the moon appears to have become smaller or less round. Then ask, what happened to the moon over the last month? Students should be able to identify a pattern of becoming more and then less round. Lead students to understand that the moon repeats this pattern every month. Next, line up the moon phases cards in order. Tell students that these cards show the phases or 5 basic shapes of the moon. Explain that the shape of the moon doesn't really change. It only seems to change because the moon moves around the Earth. From Earth, we can see only part of the moon that the sun is shining on. Point out the card showing the fully lit disk and ask, what is the moon called when we can see all of the sunlit side like this? Many students will be familiar with the term full moon. Explain that a full moon is the phase in which all of the sunlit side of the moon is visible from Earth. Then point out the card showing only the trace outline of the moon. Identify it as a new moon, which is when we cannot see any of its sunlit side. Encourage students to examine the other phases of the moon and see that they are merely stages between new moon and full moon. Show students that the pictures in the first half of their journals appear in the same order as the cards at the front of the room. Ask, how does the moon's appearance change as it moves from a new to a full moon? Students should observe more and more of its sunlit side. Then ask, what happens to the moon after it is full? Students should respond that it slowly starts to look smaller and smaller again. Rearrange the moon phases cards so that they show the order of the phases from full back to new moon again. Then ask students to compare the size of the moon as it changes from a full moon back to a new moon again. They will see less and less of the sunlit side. Help students choose the drawings in their moon journals that most resemble each of the waning phases. Finally, explain that each phase of the moon lasts a few days and gradually turns into the next phase. After about a month, the moon's phases have gone from new moon to full moon and back to new moon again. Distribute a copy of Activity Sheet 12 and a crayon or colored pencil to each student. Have students complete the sheet. To conclude Session 3, return the moon phases cards to the kit. For science background, reinforcement activities, curriculum connections, and information about the Delta Science Reader, please consult your DSM Teacher's Guide.